also won prizes during the festival in the 60s and 70s, were mostly German films or films from socialist countries, like films by Kurt Weiler, for example, won prizes. You might know him. Following the end of the GDR in 1989, the festival was promised future support in the scope of the Treaty of German Unity. Further assistance was also being received from an international circle of supporters, including numerous filmmakers loyal to the festival, such as Fernando Birri, Stanley Forman, Vladimir Pozner. The change also led to a change in the official title. The International Leipzig Film Week for Documentary and Animation Film. In 1990, the new festival director, Christiane Mückenberger, came also up with a new motto, which is Films of the World for Human Dignity. And with the slogan, see what's really going on. So there was a lot of marketing stuff behind as well, going up with a new market system in East Germany. In 1993, Otto Alder started as head of animation program to add more value and importance to the part of the festival. The first competition animation was screened in 1995. The first Golden Dove in the animation competition went to the film Achilles by Barry C.G. Purves from Great Britain. When in 1997 the first Animadoc program was established, the following text was featured in the festival catalogue to explain and introduce the new idea of the festival mix. First, the introduction started with a quote by Walter Benjamin. There is no longer wisdom, only products of its decay remain. One is folly, which has the comfort and assurance of wisdom without any of its substance. The other is the rumor of true things. And it seems like Walter Benjamin is associated with animated documentary a lot, as I recognize from the papers yesterday and from the writings of Esther Leslie anyway. Then Otto Alder writes, the program includes 6 films, which either combine documentary topics with a medium of animation or link the two genres of documentary and animated film in order to create a new artistic form. The producer's intention was not just to play around with technology or aesthetics. They thought the optimal translation of the idea, which would not have been possible with either animation or documentary alone. Any documentary footage unavailable was created. And where repetition has weakened the message of documentary pictures, they have been reprocessed and made unfamiliar. The resulting new artistic form could be described by the term Animadoc. The artists have succeeded in attaching more importance to the visual level, which seems to have a positive effect on the film's reception. And then, here. And then the last sentence, which I really like. As far as the problem of truth and authenticity is concerned, that is up to the audience. And I personally like the last sentence because it narrows down the problem when it comes to animated documentary. They only work when the audience is able to decode, the documentary aspect of it. The first 6 films of the Leipzig Animadoc program selected by Otto Alder challenged already the audience's trust in the document. And these films were Abductees by Paul Wester, Dr. Vesalius by Moll Hill, His Mother's Voice by Dennis Tupikow, A Rumor of True Things, The Wind of Change, and 1895 to 1995. And it shows that there were already a variety of styles and techniques included in what could be called animated documentary. Even photo film, like the Paul de Neuer film, or work with found footage, like the works by Paul Bush, were considered animated documentary in this very first selection of the festival. So this is something that would be continued later on to really stretch the margin of what is possible and still can be decoded as documentary. Interesting enough, 4 of the 6 films were from Great Britain, which showed how innovative the atmosphere was back then in the British film scene in the 90s. Still up to this day, the UK is a very strong country when it comes to creating animated documentary films next to Canada and Australia. But nowadays, it's more quantity than quality. Back then, it was different, vice versa, basically. In the following year, the Animadoc program at Doc Leipzig was already extended and featured 16 films in 2 presentations. Again, with 6 films from the UK and many others from English-speaking countries. Among them were well-known films like Silence by Sylvie Bringas and Ollie Yadin about a Holocaust survivor story, Repetition Compulsion by Ellie Lee from the US about abused women living in streets and shelters, and Sunrise over Tiananmen Square by Joybo Wong from Canada, whose personal story and the event of the Tiananmen Square is presented in the context of the last 100 years of Chinese history. So here are a few stills from that program. The second screen, like the 16 films, were a very intensive mix of political and social stories that are, they were presented in 2 programs. And many of these films could be called typical animated documentary. They were interviews, or they were based on original sound of people, and there were personal stories, or they talked about social criticism. So a lot of the things you always come across in animated documentary. The selection interest for the Animadoc program changed slightly in 1999. The festival took a new approach to reach a young audience by establishing the Night of Young Film with a focus on animated film. The Animadoc program was still a very popular one by that time and featured 10 films, but now, and this is the different angle, the aim of the selection was to scratch the media fringes of the genre. Some films presented pure fiction created from plasticine by computer or from individual pictures by brush or pencil. Artificial worlds are created before the very eye, illusions. What happens to concepts like truth or authenticity in that context? Your eye will pop out of your head when you see the tricks played on the documentary by the animation. So really challenging the documentary aspect. In that year and the following years, the films screened in the program Animadoc stirred up discussions if they could still be called animated documentary. Many films challenged the openness of the open-mindedness of the audience and stretched the margins between fiction and truth. Films like Cousin by Adam Elliott, for example, or Easy Living Through Chemistry by Lars Hegel were put together with 6 Weeks in June by Stuart Hilton or Hail Mary by Maureen Selwood. This alternation between fiction and reality were continued in the following years, but the program also started to highlight common features of the differences between the genre of documentary and animation. For example, Titanic, The True Story by Julian Reiniger, a computer-animated document about what exactly happened when the Titanic sank, was presented in the program of 2000. Till the year 2004, the Animadoc program was the only program of the festival, at a festival worldwide, that tried to challenge the imaginary frontier area between fiction and document. It was also the only annual program worldwide to present new animated documentaries on a regular basis. The LIAF in London and the MIAF in Melbourne started in 2005 to present something similar as in an animated documentary program. Slowly, the documentary filmmakers also discovered the potentials of animation in the following years, and they included it in their documentary films. First, the selection committee noticed these innovations in documentary films, especially in films by young documentary filmmakers, mainly coming from a visual arts background. We're not really trained documentary filmmakers, but visual arts people. And what was I? Films like Dark Lipstick Mix series, which I have a picture on here, from the German filmmaker Cathy was screened at a special program at the Leipzig Festival in 2004. And in 2008, Cyanosis by Rokshare Germani from Iran was awarded the Golden Dog in the International Young Talent Competition Generation Dog. Cyanosis, I don't know if you know this film, is a film about a painter in Tehran who has to fight many difficulties. He's schizophrenic, but the filmmaker has his painting animated and talking about the nightmares and his memories and his problems, basically. In 2008, the festival also decided to dedicate a special program to animated documentary featuring many of the best films of the genre in the thematic retrospective. The program called Animadoc, More Than Just Reality. Well, it was accompanied by a summit of animated documentary with filmmakers like Dennis Tupikov, Tim Webb, and Sheila Sofian, as well as Otto Alder, talking about the future and potential of animated documentaries. With that panel and the program, the importance of the genre was highlighted and many people become aware of the film. In the following year, the selection committee for the documentary film decided to include animated documentary into the international competition documentary film of the festival. The first film that was selected was Tying Your Own Shoes by Shira Avni, who is by profession an animated filmmaker. The film premiered in Leipzig and it won, for its first screening, the Golden Dove in the short film documentary competition, accompanied with €5,000, which is nice. With that, the jury and the festival took a strong stand for animated documentary and documentaries that challenged their margin. Tying Your Own Shoes, the film about 4 people with Down syndrome that animate the ideas about life and love. And it's a film about animation and art. Now it's common practice at Doc Leipzig to especially invite animated documentaries in order to present these new ideas, not only in the program Animadoc, but also in the competition programs Animation or Documentary. All animated documentary are watched by both selection committees, so the animation and the documentary selection committee. So they decide together where to screen these films. In order to have a basis, like an idea of what animated documentary is, the festival defined it very wide. And I have a quote from one of my colleagues, which I think is not quite nice. The work should differ from the common perception aesthetics of documentary and animated films. If that is successful, then the film presents a new kind of reality. The animated protagonist should and can be part of the imagination of the author about the reality. Using animated documentary should also be a journey to new definitions of documentary and fiction and into new aesthetic areas. For the selection, it's also important why the animation techniques has been used. If it's added to the topic or if it's part of the film, then it's considered an animated documentary. Regardless if it's a full animated film or if it's a documentary with sequences of animation. We're now hoping for an increase in quality of animated documentaries in the following years, so the festival will be able to establish a separate competition program for these films in order to acknowledge them fully as a separate genre and give animated documentary their own platform they deserve. Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you for rising and shining early enough to be here. I'm not a morning person, so I appreciate it. And thank you to the organizers for putting together this wonderful conference. I've been enjoying it a lot. And if I spontaneously ice over during my presentation, please don't be alarmed, I can still talk. I'm just not used to this definition of room temperature. Okay, so I would like to start by asking you to imagine a shot from a nonfiction film. Just the first shot from a nonfiction film that comes to mind. Okay, you probably thought of something like this, or this, or maybe that. But I can almost guarantee you, even this audience, did not imagine anything that looks like this. So why? Because we are used to associating nonfiction with live-action footage. For many viewers, nonfiction and animation remain a mismatched pair. Maureen Furness has suggested that despite the fact that live-action and animated imagery can be juxtaposed under the opposing tendencies of mimesis and abstraction, reading the two as inherently incongruent is dangerously simplistic. In fact, the very first decades of cinema history saw instances of collaboration between animation and live-action nonfiction filmmaking. Early animated shorts often contain self-referential live-action images of the animator at work, such as this. Likewise, animated sequences depicting phenomena inaccessible to the camera are often found in early nonfiction shorts, as I will demonstrate shortly. Given my time constraints, I have chosen to limit my discussion to 3 American nonfiction films of the silent era: Winsor McCay's 1918, The Sinking of the Lusitania; Dave Fleischer's 1923 educational short called The Einstein Theory of Relativity; and a 1927 film called Communication: A Film Lesson in General Science by the DeVry School Films. Though this is by no means a definitive sample, I believe it exemplifies the curious interplay between two seemingly mismatched and irreconcilable mimetic modes during cinema's infancy. These 3 titles will serve as case studies for the examination of the various functions which the drawn image fulfills in 2 common types of early nonfiction, namely actuality and educational film. Using them as illustrative examples, I will touch on issues such as subjectivity in nonfiction, animation's impact on the spectator's relationship with scientific subjects, and the notion of the nonfiction film as a spectacle. I will also emphasize animation's role as a meta-commentary on its own illustrative and expressive limitations, as well as those of nonfiction. Before I proceed, I must clarify that I have chosen to focus exclusively on cell animation, so my arguments were developed with a specific form in mind and do not necessarily apply to other types of animation. Without further ado, animation's most basic function is to expand early nonfiction films. Sorry. Not working? Oh.
No, I'm just going to bring it.
Sorry for the interruption. We
Sorry.
we just want to be able to hear this later on.
Hello. Well, when technology gets bored, that's unfortunate. Okay, to start again, animation's most basic function is to expand early nonfiction films' epistemological realm by presenting the world of the unwitnessable, that is, phenomena and events which the camera could not capture. With respect to educational film, the silent period saw the development of a representational technique utilized to this day, namely the use of animation to illustrate scientific processes, provide a closer look at the human body, and clarify the structure, properties, and functions of contemporary technological inventions. Communication, a film lesson in general science, combines animation with live-action footage of different communicational devices. In the film section on magnetism, animation is used to depict an electric current passing through a wire, a process impossible to observe with the naked eye or with cinematic equipment. In another shot, an animated frame depicts the inside of the human ear. It is not without reason that John Howes describes this mode of expression as penetrative. Drawings and footage are edited together in the following manner in this film. A photographic image of the actual object is shown first, after which the movie switches from live-action footage to animation in order to reveal the working mechanism behind a familiar device or the heretofore unseen internal structure of an object. A text box with explanatory information is included next to the image, providing an additional semiotic layer to the illustration and functioning as a silent era substitute for a voiceover. Dave Fleischer's 1923 educational short The Einstein Theory of Relativity employs a similar visualization strategy in order to illustrate different manifestations of the principle of relativity. Once again, here animation depicts objects and phenomena inaccessible to the camera, such as the appearance of Earth from the viewpoint of a person in space. To give another example, a section of the film demonstrates that, quote, time is not the same in different places, by means of drawing of two towers flashing signals at the same time to a balloonist and to a man on the ground, which looks like this. This situation would have proven challenging to recreate on a film set, but animation can present it effortlessly and also schematically, eliminating any distracting background elements. Thus, in addition to enabling the film director to overcome the limitations of cinematic equipment, animation allows for simplification of phenomena, which in turn facilitates the movie's explanatory discourse by focusing audience attention on essential points. Animation's expository function in educational films calls for a specific drawing style. The images are schematic, understated, and straightforward. There are no extraneous details or embellishments. The artist's personal style is suppressed in favor of a bland, pragmatic illustration. Visual appeal and artistic flourish become secondary to clarity. Thus, this mode of expression marks a triumph of functionality over aesthetics and demonstrates the complex interplay between form and content in these early nonfiction films. Just as content is partially dictated by the representational possibilities of animation, animation itself is shaped by the norms and requirements of its scientific content. I don't mean to suggest that instructional films were the only form of early nonfiction filmmaking facilitated by the drawn image, or that animation in the first decades of film history was exclusively an educational device. Winsor McKay's The Sinking of the Lusitania, a drawn reconstruction of the German attack on a British ocean liner, demonstrated the possibility of using animation as a documentary tool, broadening the thematic scope of animated films and challenging existing preconceptions about this mode. Moreover, McKay's decision to tackle a recent traumatic event in his country's history by means of the drawn image was a far-sighted act, both anticipating and laying the foundations of a cinematic tradition still alive to this day, as evidenced by contemporary animated documentaries such as Chicago 10, Waltz with Bashir, and the movie that some of us saw last night. There is no existing photographic record of the sinking of the RMS Lusitania. In that sense, this is another instance of animation compensating for a deficiency in the live-action record. Paul Wells describes McKay's film as, quote, animation with documentary tendency, which aspires not only to naturalistic representation, but to the engagement with social reality, end quote. The film codes itself as a non-fictional account in several distinct ways. For instance, the intertitles provide abundant statistics and factual information. This grounding of the drawn image within a data-oriented context aims to lend the film credibility as a historical document by emphasizing the accuracy of its account of the real-life event. The movie's framing and editing emulate the representational style and aesthetics of actuality cinema. The film alternates between different camera angles, creating the illusion of full coverage of the event. Long shots of the exploding ship are intercut with shots of lifeboats being lowered and people jumping into the water. As Donald Crafton notes, this was done to, quote, simulate the editing style of the newsreel subjects typical of the Universal Weekly in which the film was included, end quote. By allowing McKay's film to represent the final minutes of the Lusitania from a multitude of viewpoints, animation assumes the function of several live-action cameras operating at once. In this way, the sinking of the Lusitania compensates for the absence of said cameras during the actual event, challenging the heretofore undisputed supremacy of the actuality as the only adequate form of presenting newsworthy subjects to the audience. Donald Crafton observes that the director adapted his artistic style in correspondence with the requirements of nonfiction. He writes that, quote, the movie's documentary character called for a more realistic graphic style, with detailed cross-hatching, washes, and spatter techniques, end quote. As in educational films, realistic imagery is the preferred mode of expression, since an overly elaborate composition would detract from the actuality feel of the piece. Moreover, by means of this style, McKay builds an associative link between his film and an already established newspaper tradition of using drawing to represent real-life events. However, the film does not exclusively rely on a drawn image in order to reinforce its verisimilitude. Instead, in a section of the film, which reads like an obituary column, photographs of men of worldwide prominence, to quote the movie, appear on screen one after another. Thus, by insertion of photographic images of non-public figures, McKay once again establishes a direct connection between his fictionalized narrative and the real-life catastrophe, presenting his film as an authoritative source on these men's untimely death.
It may sound, from my presentation so far, like animation's function in early nonfiction was limited to that of an auxiliary of the camera, or indeed its replacement. However, as Thibaut Gaudian notes, quote, animation acts as a form of meta-commentary within a documentary, a form that is traditionally and most frequently characterized by live action and non-dramatization, particularly in the case of films which document the undocumentable, end quote. Indeed, the very presence of animation within a nonfiction film immediately questions the photographic image's ability to capture reality in all its complexity, since the necessity for an alternative mode of representation foregrounds live action's limitations. McKay's film, for example, employs a drone image as its primary representational strategy, constantly reminding the audience that, by means of animation, the thinking has gone where the camera could never reach. Likewise, the use of animation in educational films emphasizes the incomplete nature of the knowledge presented by live action footage, since the camera itself is an imperfect apparatus restricted by its reliance on the visible and its inability to transcend the realm of the photographable. This is easily noticeable in the communication, a film lesson in general science, where the camera succeeds in depicting the outer appearance of the human ear, yet cannot reveal its inside structure, which is illustrated by a drawing. This is not to say that the animated image does not hide anything. On the contrary, by providing the viewer with a drawn representation of an object, the film conceals the real object behind an animated on-screen version of itself. Thus, the real-life Lusitania is obscured behind McKay's animated ship, its objective parameters overshadowed by the artist's rendition of them. In fact, in the audience's mind, the on-screen vessel becomes the ship. Thus, while animation comments on live action's ability to represent reality, it also questions its own capacity to do so. The thinking issues its bold claim of authenticity, quote, from here on you're looking at the first record of the sinking of the Lusitania, immediately after it has familiarized the audience with the details of Winsor McCay's pre-production research. While this is meant to bolster the movie's credibility by convincing the viewer that Winsor McCay was well acquainted with the details of the sinking, intertitles such as this one, such as the one specifying the number of drawings required to complete the picture, reinforce the notion of the sinking as a construct, a product of an animator's personal approach to historical reality. The opening sequence informs the audience that the director decides to draw a historical record of the crime that shocked humanity. The very notion of drawing a record is a problematic one, as it brings attention to the film's creative treatment of actuality, to borrow Grierson's famous formulation. Moreover, this intertitle establishes the will of the individual, in this case Winsor McCay, as the main driving force behind this film, highlighting the movie's subjective approach to actuality. Since cell animation originates directly within the animator's imagination, its inclusion within a non-fiction film reminds the viewer of the relative nature of on-screen reality, quote unquote. In live action, the realistic representation achieved by the photographic image, combined with the film's claims to factual accuracy, creates a tempting, if unsubstantiated, illusion of unobstructed and reliable access to knowledge. However, once animation is introduced into the picture, sustaining this illusion is no longer possible, as the viewer remains constantly aware of the director's creative presence and his or her role as a mediator between the audience and the film's subject. McKay's presence, for example, is far from subtle. The sinking is nationalistic and politicized to the point where the historical event depicted in it becomes little more than an excuse for the promulgation of a pro-war sentiment. Throughout McKay's piece, Germans are presented as a hateful enemy. Proclamations such as, and I'm quoting, "The man who fired the shot was decorated for it by the Kaiser, and yet they tell us not to hate the Hun," leave little doubt as to the filmmaker's opinion or the message of the film. Educational and instructional shorts also allowed for the occasional directorial gesture of artistic flourish. Max Fleischer, who produced his brother's film, The Einstein Theory of Relativity, worked closely on the movie with a man called Garrett P. Serviss, then a popular science writer for the New York American. The two men got into an argument over Fleischer's decision to include the intertitle, "When You See the Stars Twinkle," despite being warned that it is not scientifically accurate. In his defense, Fleischer explained that whether or not the stars actually twinkle is irrelevant, since the image holds the expressive power that the filmmaker is striving to achieve. Here then, scientific accuracy becomes secondary to art. However, as Paul Ward points out, quote, "While it is important to recognize the inherently constructed nature of animated documentaries, this does not mean that we can make the leap to state that any and all truth claims or observations made by animated documentaries can be dismissed as merely a product of the animator's point of view or subjectivity. That is to say, animation does not automatically make a non-fiction film's representational strategy inferior, nor is the mixing of live action and drawing simply a frivolous experiment. While undoubtedly guilty of individualistic tendency, the films I'm looking at remain valuable pioneering efforts in the development of new modes of cinematic expression devoted to the on-screen treatment of actuality. Furthermore, today, these films function as historical documents which provide insight into the attitudes and approaches towards the depiction of reality that dominated non-fiction cinema of the silent period. Finally, the fact that these films' treatment of their subjects necessitates the simultaneous engagements of two systems of representation foregrounds the elusiveness of reality and the challenges its depiction poses before the cinematic medium. Indeed, the presence of animation in the aforementioned movies can also be read as commentary on the impossibility of a single expressive mode successfully capturing the physical world in all its richness and complexity. To quote Richard Dyer, reality is always more extensive and complicated than any system of representation can possibly comprehend, and we always sense that this is so. Representation never gets reality, which is why human history has produced so many different and changing ways of trying to get to it." End quote. At this point, it is fitting to turn the focus of this discussion to the audience's relationship with a drawn image in nonfiction cinema. The drawn image engages the audience on a distinctly more personal level, making the nonfiction material more accessible and captivating. Our wonderful chair writes that, quote, "The use of iconographic images impacts the viewer in a way in which live action cannot. We are willing to receive animated images without putting up any barriers, opening ourselves up for a powerful and potentially emotional experience." End quote. True to the roots of the term, animation infuses the scientific process and the actuality with a soul. By including a drawn image of a drowning mother and a child, the sinking emphasizes the personal dimensions of historical tragedy, facilitating viewer identification with on-screen events and transforming them from a news item into an episode of tangible human suffering. In addition to emphasizing the subjective dimension of nonfiction and enhancing its emotional appeal, the inclusion of animation foregrounds the entertainment value of the information presented in nonfiction cinema. One of the advertisements for The Sinking of the Lusitania claims that the film delivers, quote, "greater thrills than if it had been photographed," end quote. In the United Kingdom, a Bioscope review described the movie as, quote, "one of the greatest attractions ever offered on the open market," end quote. The word choice of the review emphasizes the spectacle aspect of the film, suggesting that the movie can be viewed as a thrilling war picture depicting a sensational catastrophic event in all its grim splendor. Likewise, science can and does function as an attraction. The Einstein theory of relativity features sensationalist rhetoric in its intertitles. The film announces that the miracles of yesterday are the commonplaces of today, yet presents technological inventions as miracles anyway. The plane is likened to a magic carpet, while the X-ray is described as eyes that pierce solids. Thus, scientific discovery is coded as a spectacle, an on-screen curiosity worthy of a Méliès trick film. In fact, the sequence which shows a pilot being launched into space by a cannon evokes a trip to the moon with its theatricality. The entire section dedicated to the illustration of the movement of planets simultaneously draws on and fuels people's fascination with space as a final frontier full of untold wonders, inserting fiction next to science in the context of the film and emphasizing the often blurry epistemological border between the two concepts. In conclusion, the marriage of animation and nonfiction in early cinema, while seemingly an unlikely match, has proven to be a fruitful partnership, giving birth to a complex and ambiguous cinematic form which simultaneously inhabits the realms, the abstract and the material, subjective and objective, the imaginary and the real. At once liberated from the restrictive concreteness of the photographic record and limited in their abstraction by the requirements of scientific and actuality content, these films occupy an intermediate position between straightforward mechanical recording and pure artistic creation, putting into question the very existence of these two extremes. Indeed, such inherently paradoxical works, subjective nonfiction, challenge the meaning of absolute categories such as mimesis and abstraction, and their ability to adequately portray cinema's relationship with the surrounding world. By bringing the audience closer to heretofore inaccessible phenomena and events, while at the same time emphasizing the viewer's insurmountable distance from said phenomena, these films foreground the futility of attempting to capture reality as such, while celebrating the cinematic medium's infinite possibility for discovering new realities, plural and unique. Thank you.
Ignore me, I'll be doing things in the background.
Okay, but when
Sorry about that.
maybe we can see in the meantime the presentation. Anyway, so I like to talk about two documentary films. One of them is a animated documentary. The other one is a live-action documentary. What is common in the two films is that they share the same subject, the same topic. They are about the massive immigration wave at the turn of the 20th century from Hungary to the United States. The first of them, the animated documentary, is from 1984. It's called Ach, America. And it's a 30 minutes long documentary film. Yes. And the other one is by Péter Forgács. You may know his name. He's a critically acclaimed Hungarian documentary filmmaker, and he made Hunky Blues, The American Dream in 2009. And it's a 90 minutes long film. What I like to show you is that although they share the same subject, they have a really different outcome. So they depict the same subject differently, and it is according to their film form. Yes. So I also want to place the two films according to the Nicholsian terminology, that Ach, America is a performative documentary with animation that is by definition is authoristic, so it's done by an author. There is a director, a filmmaker behind it very obviously, and it's constructed, while it's also there is a pursuit of stylization in animation. America was defined by its filmmakers, by its scriptwriters, as a documentary legend. So, of course, it's a term borrowed from literary genre theory, but we can see in it that it wants to give an allegorical interpretation also to its subject. It also has a non-conventional sujet, non-conventional narrative. It's twisted, it's narrated backwards. You will see what I mean. And the director of the film is István Orosz. He is a graphic designer. Hunky Blues, on the other hand, it combines expository mode with poetic form, poetic documentary mode, which is Péter Forgács is well known for his poetic documentary films that are reworkings of amateur live action sequences made by amateur filmmakers, and he reworks them into historical documents. But this film is in his oeuvre. It's a more conventional film because it wants to depict history not only from private stories, through private cameras, but also wants to depict history from above. So from the more professional, through more professional cameras, if you like this term. So what Hunky Blues claims is that history with a capital H can also be reconstructed, and it also claims that history, a period of history, can be narrated. We can see it as a finished narrative. So it has an end, it has a beginning, and has a proper end. While America will perform it in another way. Yeah, and now I'd like to show you two sequences of the films because you might not be familiar with these films, just in case. Yeah, let's start with Hunky Blues. So as you could see, so the latter film, Ach America, which, as I told it to you before, that it's referred to as an animated documentary legend. So it's supported by the metaphoric references of animated film form, so it might give a mythic or allegorical interpretation of this historic situation, while on the other hand, Hunky Blues, its attempt to be an analytic mapping of the same story. In the before scene excerpt, you could see in Ach America that the camera covers or takes the journey of the immigrants in 2 minutes from a little Hungarian village on the Great Hungarian Plain to a dusty little town somewhere in Pennsylvania. In the meantime, you could see here snatches of contemporary letters. Peasant women and men shout to each other from one shore of the Atlantic Ocean to the other. But here, I don't think that you, although it was subtitled, I don't think that the individual words or voices that you hear was important, because they are rather voices, as I interpreted, of the collective unconscious of history. So in the exposition of Ach America, it quickly summed up the story of the Hungarian exodus through its most relevant topographic locations, and then with a twist of the dramaturgy, it will come back from the new world to the old country step by step, and so it would also take into account the metaphoric and spiritual stages of the immigrant's story. Hence, Ach America is in my interpretation, is not about the new life across the ocean, as it about the American dream, as Hunky Blues will be, but through this animated documentary form, it can give the experience of this intermediate stage of being an immigrant, being on your way from your old country to the new, and through the form of this film, which is a fictive documentary collage. So it's important that it uses mostly fictive reenactments and animation, so constructed, highly constructed film form. It stylizes original footages, creates dreamlike stop-motion sequences of photo stills. It completes, adds on authentic footages with reenacted fictive scenes. And it's also, there are authentic interviews that were made with the immigrants, the still living immigrants in the 60s, but there are also extracts of poems, letters that are read by professional actors. But all these video and reenacted video and audio recordings, they stylistically fit into the archive footages of the age. Also some of these reenacted footages in Ach America were shot so very well that Peter Forgetch, who's otherwise an expert of archive footages, was deceived by some of these scenes. Here you can see a shot that is used also in Ach America. Of course, it's a reenacted scene, and it's also used in Hunky Blues, which is full of archive footages, but some of the scenes of Ach America are also used. And I'd like to show you some of these scenes here. Yeah, first. In Hunky Blues, the latter film that we saw, it is shot or made in accordance with Peter Forgetch's over, that is. That he uses archive collage films of amateur footages, but he uses some of the reenacted scenes of the former film as authentic archive ones, and embed them within the non-reenacted scenes of his film. Of course, I think this is the merit of the cinematographer of America, who shot the film in the style of the very beginning of the early ages of film history. However, you, as the viewer of this film, it might take the agonized faces of the passengers here, as it is because of the busy ship compartment of the journey, but maybe it's only because of the long shooting of that day. So the creators of America, they were not interested in the detailed presentation of the social or historical facts of the age, but with the help of the documentary film, they reenacted and depicted the situation of low-class people. Among the faces of these people, you can see some well-known Hungarian actors, also some actors who were actors of Béla Tar, who you might know because he is a guest delegate of Edinburgh Film Festival. And because there are such faces that reappear time to time in this film, it looks like that they are the protagonists, and it looks like that this is a story that can be told because there are faces that give face to the crowd. However, the irony of America is that it although seemingly tells the story with an end, and which had begun sometime and ended at another time, it rather tells the act of immigration, this intermediate or passage existence. And by a dramaturgical twist, the film shows the events backwards. So it starts the immigrant story in America at the American settlement, through the crossing of the ocean, and it ends on a Hungarian small train station, which I also have an excerpt of. But I might like to talk in the meantime, so.
Run 18, be 17 next month, Bell will be 18 September, and I got 14, Bill had 14 years.
See the immigrants as a group photo is taken of them at the train station, and the scene is a static shot, and you will see that in the end only a very few of them will remain at the wall. And well, I interpret this scene as they are the people of the immigration who are no more member or part of their old country, and yet not the member of the new one. Actually, in Hungarian film history, when this film was taken or made in 1984, until that time, or until the 80s, immigration in film history and films in Hungary was a taboo, mainly after the 1956 revolution and the defeat of it. And Hungarian sociologists also could only start researching immigration, and especially immigration to America, in the 80s. So this film is an illustration of that. And so it could become a general illustration of immigration existence, not only immigration at the turn of the century, but also after the 1956 revolution and the defeat of it. Hunky Blues, on the other hand, and I try to be quick, was made in 2009 at the Hungarian Cultural Year at the United States. And Hunky Blues is less concerned about the stylized or universal depiction of immigration. It wants to recall the atmosphere of that period, and it wants to do it from a factual and expert point of view, while it also involves us in private stories. So the objective story of immigration is presented through an explanatory mode and narrated by extra-diegetic God's voices, and the subjective story of immigration could be accessed through authentic interviews taken by Hungarian sociologists in the 60s with the still living immigrants. So Hunky Blues is full of individual and unique yet typical lives. However, while it also presents contemporary official approaches to immigration of the authorities, through that it presents multiple points of views along each other, it gives an analytic and educational manner to this film, and it proves that that history with a capital H can be reconstructed, and these private family stories that are that we can learn in this film are put one by one on the sociographic historic framework of history. And I like to tell something about the use of human voice in this film, as you could also hear it. I think the subjective and emotional identification with participants of the immigration takes place directly through the immigrants' own voices. Although you might not understand Hungarian, human voice has an expressive potential, as it was also claimed by Bella Onasro in her dissertation animating documentary, and this expressive potential goes beyond what we might interpret from the words that it speaks. And here in this film, in the English version of Hunky Blues, I think this direct subjective and emotional identification with the immigrants is greatly hindered by the voiceover that they use, which is perfect BBC or Oxford English. Hence, those private stories that are told by peasant women and men, their moving tone, delivery, timbre are greatly neutralized by the voiceover narration, which of course gives an maximum intelligibility, but no emotional entrance to the individual stories. Just a moment. So while America uses original soundtracks and real unscripted non-performance interviews, Hunky Blues does not aim to be a fictive documentary. It does not want to reenact, but to recall the past. And it's in accordance with Forgach's earlier films, especially Private Hungary, you might know that, which is composed of found amateur footages, where intimacy and subjectivity is provided by the person standing behind the camera. However, Hunky Blues, the archive footages are prints of the early professional photographers and cameramen of the age of the Lumiere brothers, whose job was to capture life as it is and placing the world within one's reach. And I think in Forgach's film, when we look at these actuality films and newsreels, and also he uses Edison's kinetoscopes, we are looking for these private lives in these footages. And to conclude, I can say that in the end, both film wants to achieve to re-experience history as a viewer, and that we as the viewer can identify with the characters of the history. Hunky Blues, on the one hand, proves that a finished chapter of history has a complete narrative and can be retold through private stories and contemporary authentic footages, while Ach America, on the other hand, offers an allegoric, hence ageless interpretation of the collective historic event, the monarchic immigration between the two end locations, Hungary and the United States. So, thank you.